I fear that the speaker is muted because there's no audio coming to us. Good morning and welcome back for this third day. And we will refer to some of the topics that were tackled also in the two first days. And in particular, in this session, we'll go back to the PSD2 or PSD3. Actually, there's a question mark there because we know that according to the European Commission payment strategy, at the end of this year, we're going to start the process for a possible revision of the second directive on payment systems. And for this reason, it was important to speak to the protagonists of the PSD2 and refer to its possible revision by also considering some interesting aspects that came out in the two first days relating to the market of new regulated services. That is to say, all of these services are based on the access to account information, also with a view to the open finance. So there will be this debate, which I hope it's going to be interesting, and that will be done with the protagonists. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. Gianluca D'Imperio, Group Compliance, Unicredit. Marco Folcia, Partner, PwC Italy. Marcus Mattischer, Policy Officer, Payment Services, DG FISMA, European Commission. Massimo Doria, Head of Payment Services and Retail Services, Bank of Italy. Annie Mikanen, Senior Policy Advisor, Payments and Innovation, European Banking Federation. So, both Marcus and Massimo have lived as protagonists the very last phase of the negotiations that led to the fine-tuning and the drafting of the PSD2 text. And Marcus is now at the European Commission, whereas at that time it was at the Austrian government. And so I'll start with them. And I'd like to ask Massimo, who is now a national authority in this connection. I'd like to know what was the experience relating to the implementation of PSD2 and what is the impact on the market and also on the relevant authorities. Thank you. Thank you, Rita, and good morning to all of you. And I really wish to thank you because for me, it is always very interesting to go back to the topics that you are proposing and which are part of the past that you recalled, and it was an important experience, but also to our present commitment. And it will be an important part of our future commitment, and also, well, next year, actually. I have some slides that I'd like to share, and that will be helping me in my presentation, but I'd like to start with a consideration that refers to the mention you made of the negotiations. So maybe Marcus is going to be a good witness of that situation. But when we've completed the directive and have reached an agreement, I personally remember that there wasn't a clear perception of the entire effect stemming from it. Why am I saying this? Because it is quite frequent, and also in relation to other regulatory frameworks, a constructive criticism is related to the possibility for the rules to actually represent and depict the market. And it's also true that this can be considered from a different perspective as well, because the task of the rules is not that of regulating what exists already, but also to lead the way and to indicate a possible future way for the efficient development of the market. So the PSD2 did it. If I may have the slides, I will linger on some specific aspects. Okay. So you were correctly referring to the impact which involves anyone and which involves all of the authorities, but probably this is less frequent and also less debated. But besides the impact on the market, and for the market, there's also the need for the authorities to comply and to adjust. And the commitment is huge, also in terms of extent of the profiles and the adjustment to change, adaptation to change, but also the measures to be adopted. And here I've listed a few of them only, but we include also the transposition and also the participation in the international frameworks, and the commitment in terms of support, which includes training and clarifications, and also a number of organizational measures to be ready to accompany the change. So I believe that the two most visible dimensions of the impact of the PSD2 are represented by the new security model, so the customer authentication and the access to accounts. That was a revolution that places Europe in a position of global benchmark. And the two dimensions are strictly related, but starting from security, of course, there was a huge and multidimensional impact, and especially when it comes to the strong customer authentication. I'm not coming to the detail of each single item, but the question which is often raised, including the authorities, is that it was worth it. It was worth it because it was a complex system that required adjustments and adaptations, and also it required some adjustments of the user experience. So we have some data telling us that it was worth it, and I'll try to mention a few of them. But these are, let's say, quite new data. And the first quarter 2021, according to our data, the fraud rate on the value of electronic payments as a whole, so I'm not just talking about one tool, but all tools, dropped significantly versus the same period last year. So now we are around, well, we are in a situation which is between 15 and 20%. And this is because the SCA had a strong impact on payment systems and on the security of payment systems. So we can have a reduction in the incidence of frauds on the value of electronic payments, and a strong, and especially when it comes to the remote payments, we have a reduction by 50% in terms of frauds. And also, as a witness of the good result relating to the strong customer authentication, there's the fact that the cross-border payments, and in particular the non-SEPA, so those without the SCA, they are less secure. So with a level of security which is rather good in terms of data, but of course the security is lower than the ones covered under the strong customer authentication. And we also have, and I do not succeed in saying the speaker to move on to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So from my point of view, another important aspect, positive, is relating to the open banking, which had a truly huge impact and a significant spreading and multi-directional spreading. This is a pathway that we cannot consider as completed because we still have some obstacles that need to be solved. And many of you know that the Bank of Italy is also committed directly, has been committed in identifying the obstacles and finding solutions. But also in this case, I like to recall that Italy also gives and sets the example, because Italy succeeded in conjugating the access to accounts also, for instance, through the system of platforms that allow a standardized and easier dialogue between the subjects that hold the accounts and third parties. So, I'd like to make a few remarks, but I see that if the topic is, and it will be also within the PSD3, of fostering the digital payments market, and also with several financial dimensions, and not just financial dimensions, and having an increase and growth in the European situation, well, of course, this is absolutely relevant. Well, actually, today we had the chance to extend this activity to the advanced components of the digital payments. And we have to consider activities relating to the crypto activities. But what I like to draw your attention upon is that we do not just have a security aspect. There's also a wide range of options to support digital payments and e-commerce. So it would be useful to think, because we are already considering as a PSD3 on how to make everything consistent. Also in consideration of models that we considered as desirable, and also in terms of performance and usability. And of course, it is necessary to emphasize, but we have to allow a push to innovation. So the more we succeed in having a market framework which is consistent, the more we provide comparability, and the more we allow competitors to act as a stimulus for new solutions. So I would stop, and I would like to linger on a specific point in 1 minute and a half left. How to do that? The Bank of Italy is convinced that an essential solution is represented by a dialogue with the entire market and with the service providers, but also with those that use the services, with service users. And then it is necessary to consider this as a system that can also be considered as a community. So we made an example relating to the migration to the strong customer authentication, where this was in practice, actually. And our country was actually managing the pandemic, and but we guaranteed a migration to a CA that was quite tidy and compliant with the rules, but we didn't stop any payments. But that was possible thanks to a joint effort that saw the contribution of all of the stakeholders. So through the slides, I'm not showing you the result, but the result is absolutely appreciated, and our country is now very well advanced in terms of enforcement of the SCA as compared to other European countries. So I'd like to close my first contribution by underlining that dialogue is not an episode, it's a model. And of course, the construction of a dialogue with the market is fundamental, and this is what we are actually proposing through our fintech channel and also our Milano Hub Innovation Center for the analysis and development, and also with the sandbox that will allow some tests, but that will be part of another occasion of debate. Thank you, Rita. Thank you also for this injection of optimism and positive approach that allows us to look at the future with a great deal of optimism. But then, going back to the title of our Salone dei Pagamenti, which is Infuturarsi, that is to say, come in the future, also because we have used this word to describe what we are doing. Well, I believe that this word, infuturarsi, is particularly suitable, let's say, for this session. And therefore, I would like to give the floor to Marcus because, as I said in my opening remarks, last summer the European Commission launched the call to perform the assessment and on the enforcement of the PSD2, which is the first, let's say, step within an entire revision process. So a process that includes several aspects and several steps which are not necessarily leading to the revision, but which give us, let's say, the specific prospect. So I would like to ask, it appears that now Marcus is not connected any longer. And in fact, I don't see him. Okay, apologies. So at this point, I move on to Annie. And I'd like to ask Annie to provide us with the perspective by European banks on the implementation of the PSD2 and also the effect on the market by starting to look at the future, also a very first, let's say, analysis relating to the main aspects that need to be maybe revised or reconsidered. Thank you, Annie. You have the floor.
Thank you, Rita. And let me start by thanking you and Abi for the invitation to this very distinguished panel. Very happy to be here, share my views of PSD2 and potentially PSD3. So if I start with the impact from my point of view, from our point of view, that PSD2 has had, I would very much concur with Mr. Doria. I mean, it has been quite a big adjustment to the industry, to the market, for banks in particular, I would say, for the two big parts of PSD2, which is the access to accounts by TPPs and the implementation of SCA. That's not everything that PSD2 is, but I think those are the two main points. So in terms of the access to accounts, what I can say from my point of view is that, like we've heard previously, it's been quite a long process for various reasons, I would say. But I think finally now we are getting to a place where the situation in most markets is quite stable. There may be some further adjustments to be made at national level. But we are sort of getting to, in my understanding, a more sort of business as usual situation. Marcus will talk about it, I think, but we are expecting some changes, of course, in the form of the 90-day exemption changes that we will have to implement, I think, next year. In terms of the impact that we sort of see on the market, obviously we, as a banking federation, we don't have any studies at this point, but I think what we can safely say is that there are many TPPs on the market, both TPPs that pre-existed PSD2 and then new TPPs that completely have not been part of the previous world of screen scraping. I checked the EBA register yesterday. I saw hundreds of entries for both PIs, EMIs, and then AISPs. So even without the UK, which I think previously was a big driver for TPPs, I think we do see a big number of TPPs. Of course, the sheer number is not telling everything, but I do think it's a valuable indicator of the market. And also, as an observation, I think I can say that in terms of the dynamics of the market, I mean, the payments market is of course a very dynamic one, but I do tend to observe that the TPP market also seems to be quite a dynamic one. I think in the news we regularly read of different developments, TPPs being bought by big actors, etc. So it seems to be a market that is very much in development and that attracts a lot of attention. So I think in terms of TPPs, we did not see any cliff effect that I think some actors were a bit afraid of at some point. I would say overall, it seems to be me that it's a major evolution of the market. I don't know if it's a revolution of the market, because I would still like to remind that banks are still there. We were not sort of taken over by this evolution. I think banks have also well adapted to this change by first of all complying with the law, and then also in some cases, in numerous cases, becoming TPPs themselves. But I think it has to be sort of said that we're at the very beginning of the market transformation. This is just the start of a process, so we will see a lot in this space. In terms of the implementation of SCA, Mr. Doria also alluded to this. It has been also quite a lengthy process in some parts. I would say, especially for e-commerce card transactions, where we had the supervisory flexibility until the end of last year. My understanding is that the situation is, SCA is now implemented in all markets, and from the findings of the EBA this summer, I think the figures of SCA compliant transactions are quite encouraging, and also the reduction of fraud that is in line with what was said previously. It seems to be quite significant, but I would say I think these findings, they need to be confirmed, they need to be studied over time, and I think this is why the Commission will do a thorough assessment of the PSD2 impact. So I would say, if I take the original objectives of PSD2, which was to enhance competition, innovation, and security of payments, I think by and large the first indicators would definitely indicate that those have been achieved by and large. Then, if I quickly go to my wish list for PSD3, here I would not go now into content aspects. I would just like to highlight two more like process aspects that I think may not have been optimal in PSD2. First, I would like to emphasize the sort of necessity to early on align between different legislative pieces. Here, I would like to take the example of the interaction between PSD2 and GDPR, where there is an obvious, I would say, tension or challenge that has to be clarified. And I would say, a bit unfortunately, that was done after PSD2 was implemented. So now we have the guidelines of the European Data Protection Authority that we are quite wary that they might actually, if not go against what PSD2 requires, at least there's a certain tension there, and they go a bit against the implementation that has been required of banks. So I would really underline the need to include this in the process. And to align with different pieces of legislations. We know that there is a new EID legal framework coming that will impact banks and other actors in their payment business, in SCA, for instance. So there is really this need to to align this before the market actors do their implementation, because afterwards, of course, changing the implementation is always burdensome and costly on all market actors. The other point I would like to raise is the process overall. I mean, we all know we have the level 1 text, we have the level 2, the RTSs, then we have for the SCA and CSC RTS, we have numerous opinions. Then we have the Q&A process at level 2. Then we have the whole process at national level with NCAs. And while I'm not saying that all of those levels have their role and the actors there definitely have their role, we do tend to observe that the continuous clarifications and the sort of the fact that there doesn't seem to be a stopping point at which banks can sort of safely say that, okay, now I know what I need to implement and I can trust that this is what I need to implement. So I would, if ever there is a PSD3, and there will be down the line, of course, I think I would encourage the authorities to think about this process, how it can be streamlined in such a way that the market can have security in their implementation, and this sort of ongoing clarification process is maybe enhanced, I would say. So I will maybe stop my remarks there, and happy to continue afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you once again for the positive assessment, and also with some shades, let's say. But before looking at the future, and now I like to change a little bit the order we set, I like to give the floor to Gianluca, because Annie often referred to the role of banks. So I would like to ask Gianluca, who is from a bank that is present in several European markets and countries, I'd like to know what was the experience of a bank like UniCredit in the implementation of the PSD2, what were the positive aspects and what were the less positive aspects. Thank you. Thank you, Rita, and I hope you can hear me well. Yes, we do. And thank you for inviting me. My point of view is, of course, the compliance function that I deal with at UniCredit, and I represent a point of reference for Italy and the group level for the implementation of this complex regulatory framework. I share what Annie said relating to an overall situation which is, let's say, positive on the one side, but we still have some difficulties that undoubtedly we as industry have gone through in the last 2 years. That is to say, as from the moment in which there was the full implementation of the PSD2. Our point of view as UniCredit, and then as a pan-European stakeholder, let's say, is different from a statement made by the CEO of one of the important challenger banks in the UK. I don't agree with him because he said that in their case, and then, by the way, the UK was also defined as the cradle of home banking. Well, he said that it was a failure. I don't share this view, or at least for Europe, where conversely, I would like to highlight the advantages that are now before our eyes and that will be visible in the years to come, but without hiding the complexities of this regulation, and which this regulation entailed, both in a broad regulatory framework and also the operational complexities that we had to face in complying with these requirements. And as Annie said, there are continuous clarifications that took place during the last few years in over 170 replies given by the European Banking Authority to define some aspects that within the RTS actually had not been considered as sufficiently clear. And this led us to a series of interventions and additional let's say, interventions to comply also with the market evolution. But then, going back to the experience of UniCredit, I would say that we, of course, represent a peculiarity in the Italian market, because between 2018 and 2019, we decided to develop a single interface in the European countries in which we are present. So 9 European countries are adopting the same API, and therefore we departed from the trend that we saw to rely on national platforms and in assessing this interface, we saw that it has not always been assessed homogeneously. Not because actually there wasn't I wouldn't say that there was a different approach by national authorities, but rather, and we realized it over the time, there were different characteristics in the European markets. I like to refer to an example, the presence of our subsidiary company in Germany. And in Germany, the role of third parties had been carried out even before the coming into force of PSD2. And then we needed to have a sort of business continuity of these operators. And this created also the need to have or to implement slightly different solutions. So on the one side, there was our will to make this ambitious choice, which had to be consistent with our regulatory framework and the harmonization within the European Union. And on the other side, we encountered and are still encountering some difficulties that will lead us to be optimistic on the possibility that the regulatory framework, also in the light of the revision, might somehow overcome these difficulties. And I also like to recall, always, of course, from the point of view of the regulatory compliance, so there's that I have to try and provide shared interpretation. Also, the other aspect mentioned by Annie, that is to say the fact that we have regulations that undoubtedly, and as regards payment systems and the specific context in particular, have been overlapped and also entailed some tensions. And in fact, the recent guidelines issued by the Privacy Authority, which intended to deal with this overlapping in a structured way, by also entailing some difficulties in the necessary adjustment and compliance with these provisions within the regulatory framework of PSD2. And in this case, our point of view is that of being the protagonists of these changes coming from this regulation. So there's a big deal of satisfaction in order to, well, be able to face the implementations deriving from the PSD2 in a joint and group level way, so in line with the let's say the wishes of the authorities and the national authorities. So we do recognize the advantages and maybe they can be increasingly introduced among our customers with these innovative and competitive services. And also, we like that the role of banks is not seen just as a subject obliged to guarantee the access to accounts to their customers. We'd like to continue to be an active stakeholder in this system without any prejudices, but with the will to collaborate with all of the actors and third parties, national authorities, in order to make open banking as well as the further measures that are interconnected, but we like to have a point of reference, so not just as a European regulation, but also with the other countries. So what I may underline is that we are doing and we will do anything possible to continue to guarantee the full implementation of the PSD2 and also for a better experience of our customers, even in those cases in which we end up, for instance, availing ourselves of third-party services. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for this experience, which is broad, also when it comes to the European landscape. And let's say that based on your perspective, we are back to, let's say, midway, neither in hell nor in heaven. But I'd like to go back to heaven, and I would like to give the floor to Marcus. And I'd like to ask him, so having considered the first steps of the call for the impact study of the PSD2, then the process begins. And what do we have to expect? And also, what is the pathway that the European Commission will define? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Rita, for the invitation to this conference. And I'm sorry for the beginning because there were some bad connection issues and I had to change the device. But I'm delighted to give a brief overview on where the Commission services are currently standing with regard to the review of the directive, and also to outline the next steps. So what can be expected. So we are currently very much in a listening mode since we are at the very beginning of our preparatory work with regards to the review. So I very much look forward to the discussions we have today, and also the experience and feedback you give us on the application of the directive. So these events, I think, are very important, especially already at this stage, which means at the very early stage. So as you know, the directive has a review clause. It's Article 108. And the clause mandates the Commission to assess the application and impact of the directive and to come up with an amendment, so a legislative proposal, if deemed appropriate. So a report was already expected in January this year. But unfortunately, we have seen several member states who being lacking behind with the transposition of the directive, and especially the implementation of the provisions on strong customer authentication. Took much longer than expected for obvious reasons. So that's the reason why we have decided to postpone the review. So we are already late. And so the review clause itself mentions a number of very specific topics that we are obliged to address. For example, on provisions on charges, surcharging, also on the scope, whether additional provision should be applied, for example, for one-leg transactions, access to payment systems. So we are being asked to look again to the provisions with regards to the access to payment systems, and then whether certain thresholds are still up to date. So it's very limited. But what I want to stress here is that the Commission has also published its retail payment strategy in September 2020, sorry, which includes additional topics. So particularly on Pillar 2 of the strategy, you will find additional topics which we need to have a look at. Strong customer authentication as an example. So we need to have a look on the impact of the fraud level, whether additional measures are necessary to react on new types of risks stemming, for example, from instant payments or from contactless payments. Also the use of electronic IDs in the context of strong customer authentication is something we will look into. I also want to stress the level playing field within payment services providers. So we see new services and new providers on the horizon, where we need to assess whether they should be in the scope of the directive or not. As an example, we see groups which often have a mix of regulated payment activities and non-regulated services, so pure technical service provisions. And we need to assess whether there is a risk stemming from this kind of services. Even group supervision is something we are discussing and we have to discuss. And I mean, in the interest of time, I can still prolong the list. Annie has mentioned the alignment and consistency with other EU legislation. Annie mentioned GDPR, data protection. It's also about how does it align with the e-money directive? Is there a need to have a further alignment? So this is more than food for thought, I would say. So these are just a few examples, and the Commission has a very broad approach to this review. We have not yet drawn any conclusions, and as I said, for the time being, we are very much in a listening mode. In terms of process, our review is basically built on three main building blocks. The first one is an external study. So we have published in the summer a call for tenders for an external study, and we have very high expectations with regard to this study. So we want to see legal and economic input on how the directive is applied, pros and cons. So kind of backward-looking exercise, but it also includes forward-looking aspects. So we are also expecting concrete recommendations for a possible a change or amendment to the current directive. So we have the external study. We also have the call for technical advice. So we have sent end of October a call for advice to the EBA. These are specific questions related more to the supervisory experiences, of course, for example, on strong customer authentication. And we will then also receive input from the authority. Of course, we will launch a public consultation, which will most likely happen in the first quarter of next year. And I would also like to take the opportunity here to encourage you to take part in this consultation, because this is crucial for us in order to make, of course, the right decisions. And of course, we are in constant dialogue with member states. We also have a dedicated industry working group where we'll also receive input. There is not yet and the official launch of the consultation, so this will only take place when the call for evidence, I think it's called, is being published on the website, which can still be expected by the end of this year. So this is our objective, and we are then planning to finalize the report by end of next year. And if we come to the conclusion, but only if we think, based on all the evidence we are gathering, if we come to the conclusion that there is a need for legislative changes, it would, of course, be published together with a thorough, in-depth impact assessment, and this would be at the beginning or first quarter of 2023. So this is, in a nutshell, the overview of what the Commission has in mind. And again, I'm looking very much forward to the discussions today. And again, they are crucial. And I think I will leave it here. Thank you.
No, unfortunately, she is muted. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you so much for this overview. And we will, of course, participate in the consultation. And Annie is supporting us. But in the system committee of the FDA, which I am actually chairing, we are already starting the first analysis within the perspective of contributing to that dialogue with the European Commission. At this point, I'd like to broaden the picture, because Massimo, in his remarks, said that PSD2 taught something, but the same thing was said by Benoît Cœuré at the opening of the Salone dei Pagamenti, although the approach was slightly different. So I'd like to ask Marco Folcia, PwC, who has a world perspective. I'd like to know to what extent PSD2 taught something to the others and led the way. And if we make a comparison with other areas in the world, what were the points of strength and which were the less positive aspects? Thank you. Thank you, Rita, and I'd like to thank Abby for inviting me, and it's been very interesting to listen to the colleagues that took the floor before me. I would like to start by referring to what you were mentioning before, that is to say innovation and the fact that PSD2 led the way, because I've been doing this job for 25 years, and in the last 5 years, that is to say since PSD2 has been issued, and then we were more innovative, also in terms of regulatory framework, so more innovative than the rest of the world, then I felt proud of being European and also sharing what we did in Europe in the rest of the world, because generally it happened that it was the Americans or the colleagues from the UK that represented the innovations within the payment systems or within the financial systems. Whereas this time, it happened that we as Europeans described how a regulation that really represented an innovation point may inspire other central banks, other countries which are developing regulatory frameworks that today are inspired by the PSD2. So if we want to summarize what was said so far by the previous speakers, when actually we have relations with the central authorities of some countries with which we're working, so we're supporting, for instance, some central banks in the Middle East or in Asia or in Latin American area, and well, the experience we share as Europe and as PSD2 is a regulatory framework that turned out to be flexible, as the Bank of Italy said, and also as the European Banking Association mentioned, and also the colleagues that took the floor before me. So flexibility was there because the regulator wanted to indicate the guideline and the principles to be considered in the market, and then gave the operators of the entire supply chain of the payments, well, to express one's contribution and to improve and continue, therefore, to innovate. And so if we refer to what was said about the strong customer authentication and how, for instance, the RTS was issued after the enactment of the directive, and what happened after, well, then we look at a market that showed that in 90 days there might be frictions, and then we're thinking, and actually this has been included in a document which is a consultation paper, so it is possible to extend all this to 180 days. So in this sense, our regulatory framework offers flexibility in order to guarantee to keep up with the times and also to have a more and more effective implementation for also end users and consumers, which are those safeguarded. Another important aspect concerns the push to open, especially when it comes to other market operators, and this was mentioned by Annie. So there are several third parties that are approaching this market, and we see a convergence, an intersector convergence. We are starting to see, as a financial services expert, that there are operators are from outside of this market, but they join the market because they are interested in completing the payment experience, and they are interested in doing that with the end part of the payment. So they look at this market as an opportunity to use data and payment information that PSD2 is giving as a great opportunity and innovation, mainly if we think that it was issued in 2018, then of course it was disruptive as an innovation at that time. And if we look at the subjects which are now taking advantage of this opportunity in the market, and I'm quoting and referring to some data, then there's a growth that today sees nearly 60 subjects authorized by the central bank and through the Bank of Italy in our market, with an important growth, and nearly half of it is part of the non-financial services market. So the intersector convergence, because they're interested in being part of the market and in doing business and also in providing additional services to their customers. So if we open all that at European level, and this was also mentioned before, we have nearly 1,300 subjects that today received authorization, if we exclude also UK and Poland. And in Europe as well, nearly 40% of these subjects do not belong to the financial services market. So an additional element to competition, as our regulator wanted to. So then there's attention paid to consumers and users. So the strong customer authentication, and in any case the security in authorizing the payment also by the consumer or the end customer, and then as an important pivot to give the consumer back the ownership in performing the transaction, and also in PSD2 that's the fact that data belongs to the customer and to the end user. So this places us in a position that allows us to reason on possible further use cases for the sharing of data and information going beyond the, for instance, what is linked to information on the accounts and payment information. And if we look at the other aspects, there may be a stimulus to the development of a cashless economy, which is not just based on the use of payment cards as a main tool, but also it regulated the fact that there were also other tools, so not discrimination whatsoever. So, for instance, we are considering the payment initiation service, or also a specific rule based on which, for instance, it is not possible to have fees that may privilege some instruments rather than others. So here we're very much innovative as Europe, far more than it happens in other jurisdictions where, for instance, either regulation existed, but it was not at the same level as the European one, or where a specific regulation did not exist, it was possible to be inspired by it. Of course, there are some areas that areas for improvement, but actually we have a table, and ask to please show the chart to make a comparison between what happens in the rest of the market, and in particular, as I said before, some emerging markets are now being inspired by our regulatory framework. Is it possible to show the slide? I don't know whether it's possible to show the slide. Otherwise, I'll try to tell. Because this slide, this chart that we have prepared, there was a list of the different countries, and also we have some of the countries which are emerging countries, for instance, Middle East and the Southeastern Asia, which went beyond the sharing of information and started to consider also exploiting the intersector convergence. Okay, there we go. This is the slide. Thank you. They started to include also some roadmaps to start and share the information from other services, and then to give access to third parties to develop new use cases and to develop businesses in a different way. And that's to allow these subjects to exchange information that could go beyond the mere information linked to payments. So somehow we're going towards the direction based on which, well, the direction that we have traced as open banking. So by opening up the infrastructures of banks and allowing subjects to get the payment information. So we're going towards the open finance. So to consider also further aspects and elements in the roadmap in terms of sharing of financial information, and of course by giving priority to the customer, up to, and in some other markets, we refer to open data, so intersector convergence, if we look at Australia or what is happening, for instance, in Saudi Arabia or in some other markets, where the will by the regulator, well, Brazil, for instance, that in a precise way defined a roadmap with precise dates in terms of implementation of these further use cases and services. So this gives the opportunity to go beyond some topics that we were mentioning before, and also in relation to the overlapping of regulations, because it is possible to include all the aspects allowing to define the evolution, let's say, that is to say, the open banking. And in this sense, one of the recommendations for our regulator is to be brave and go towards this direction by continuing to give the protection for end users. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, of course, we refer to the things that many of you mentioned and which also come from the first day of this event. There was open finance to think about these topics. But then I'd like to ask Massimo for his own assessment, let's say, because you said PSD2 had well represented a successful activity. Said that in the overall assessment, the 3 goals, the PSD2 were achieved, but now we know that the PSD2 intended to identify some specific aspects by also considering conflicting goals, that is to say, easiness of use, and all the things that you've mentioned. Or also the regulations in the market and competitions, but also control, suitable controls and checks. So what are the items that, according to you, need to be, I wouldn't say revised, but that deserve a new analysis, also in the light of how the market evolved? I'll try to answer by considering what was said so far. I've taken a lot of notes, well, this is very useful. And I start from what Marcus said. They say we are rethinking the directive with a broad approach. And I'm happy that so it is, because from my point of view, there are at least 2 levels of intervention on these rules. The first level is the one of updating a series of provisions that looked at the future and that need to be able to manage change, which is very fast. So this is necessary for several reasons. And in fact, Marco Volcia said that as from 2018, the directive has come into force, and if you think about the document proposed, the first time was drafted in 2012, so that was a huge vision. So the first model is the updating of the rules. But if I may, a second level that has to be considered is that of referring to something which is not existing now, that's the support to the digital progress of the payment system. And it's very much encouraging what Marcus said. So the parameter is the strategy of the European Commission, and inside of that strategy we'll find a pathway, and we have to reason about it, and we have to intervene on the existing rules, and we have to make them also more consistent, because there are some rules that go towards other directions. So I don't want to now avoid your question, but we have to be more aware on the pervasiveness on the payment rules. So I have a number of projects that have to do with completely different topics, like financial markets and securities, but the rules of the PSD2 are enforced and allowed to unlock solutions, because payments are pervasive and in the financial world and also beyond it. And the rules have to be able to look at the other dimensions. And as to your question, the balance, well, this system was developed in a specific moment, and by also considering the needs to break a wall that was also of mistrust. So my answer is no, I don't think there's a balance, and I think we need to intervene. This system was started by considering a market concentrated on a set of operators, and it's good to hear that banks want to be protagonists. But of course now there's an unbalancing in terms of liabilities and costs. Well, this has to be corrected. Also with a view to extending the sharing of information and involving further and additional subjects, so additional to, for instance, banks and account holders. So this means that when the technological operators, the big tech, enter the market and foster competition, then competition has to comply with shared rules and mutual rules. A final item, the balance between handiness and security. Well, this is a difficult item and has to be preserved. So, in my opinion, first of all, we need to be aware of the fact that security is a competitive factor, because what operators ask is not to be relaxed. Actually, we need to have good rules and that everyone enforces them. So we may also work on PSD3, and this allows to explore best what is offered by technological innovation, for instance, digital guardian, which refers to data protection. But this is something that may benefit from the availability. So constraints that are absolutely important. I'd like to close by saying that it is true that there's a reference to rules and indications that represent a difficulty for those that have to enforce them. But this is a contribution we need to provide to the European legislators. We need to understand what is the model we want, if it is a model which we are now limiting or having stricter standards, or if we want to have a model in which we keep the standards more open and we accept the fact the market alone is not going to be in a situation of balance and the authorities have to intervene continuously. So I close by saying that our community is ready to provide its contribution, and this is done also thanks to the Payments Committee. And also, the Bank of Italy is ready and willing to provide a contribution to the Commission, as it was always done. Thank you. Okay, so I have to say that your very last mention refers to a question that has come from the public, and the question was how to correct the unwanted effect and determine that the EBA and the national authorities had the need to come into the details the technical details in terms of implementation. So it's a good thing to see that both the market and the authorities give us a sort of converging approach, a list on the topics that need to be faced. But this mention leads me to ask Annie to share with us the relationship between this new approach and the work that is being done on a possible scheme for the access to payment accounts. I'm specifically referring to the work in the ERPB and now EPC on the SEPA payment account access scheme. And of course, Annie has followed from day one the situation, and she's still following the situation within the EPC. Please.
Yes, thank you, Rita. Very quickly, maybe in the interest of time, I think the SPA, as we call it now, is a very encouraging initiative. I think we've worked on it for a good part of the last 3 years, starting when PSD2 wasn't even fully implemented yet. But basically, for the moment, it's at the very beginning of the actual work and the development of a potential scheme. But I think the two sides of the market got together, of course, under the auspices of the ERPB and chaired by the ECB, and sort of had an understanding over the course of the last 3 years that perhaps the fulfillment of the legal obligations only under PSD2 does not always provide for the best market outcomes. So the purpose of this scheme is then to take a really market-led approach, of course, one that the authorities are fully observing, to go beyond the PSD2 legal obligations and implement still in the area of payments, so not extending into further into open finance, but take parts in the payments world that are not part of the legal obligations, but could be part of a sort of a mutual benefits monetization, perhaps by the market. And I think this is really important to balance the PSD2 approach, which is not such. So it's basically one part of the market opening up its infrastructure to another side of the market. So I really think for the further development of open payments or open finance, it's really, really important to take this approach to balance the market and to provide incentives on both sides of the market to really come to the best outcomes and the most innovative outcomes that can serve customers. So I think that's what I can say on the SPA work at this point. We're very much supporting this sort of outcome. Also, when you think about the further development of open finance, way beyond payment, we are fully convinced that a PSD2-like legislative approach should not be replicated further into the area of open finance. I will stop there. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to ask Gianluca as well. His idea, especially when it comes to the interaction with the other regulations that in this moment we are seeing. So digital finance, digital market access. So what are the aspects that, according to you, need to be taken into consideration to make all of this framework harmonized? Thank you. Thank you for the question, Rita. So as a matter of fact, the digital finance strategy, inside of which, by the way, we also see the retail payment strategy that represents an important effort that we recognize. in order to face the challenges and the risks associated to the digital transformation of financial services, and payments are historically at the forefront when it comes to this specific framework of the innovation. But if you allow me, before moving to this topic, I'd like to make a brief mention to the expectations, let's say, on our side, and also as regards PSD3, because either it is a directive or hopefully a regulation, then the idea is to have an in-depth analysis and also an analysis that so far, somehow the reason why the full goals of the regulation were not entirely fulfilled, but also going beyond the aspects I mentioned, and I'm thinking about the revision of transparency in payment services, and also the wallet out, and also in line with the recent objectives set by the G20 on the goals and in terms of further development of the open banking, we favorably see also the legislative approach aimed at having a framework on the open finance and open data and on the broader sharing of data inside of the EU, and by always guaranteeing not only competitiveness but also the possibility of preserving data by being inspired by the GDPR. Going back to the digital finance, if we consider all of the regulatory initiatives aimed at identifying the phenomena of innovation, as UniCredit, we've been dealing with these developments also thanks to ABI and also ABILAB. So in this case, we are talking about these topics and also a number of legislative approaches linked to the digital finance. But if we look at the European perimeter, then the type of approach that the legislator is having is consistent with the developments that we are seeing, also from the point of view of the participation of market operators, and in particular I am referring to the third-party technology providers that have a more and more pervasive role within the financial services, and also a partnership with banks. So from this point of view, it is possible to analyze all of these aspects on the one side by considering that the use of these technology providers is made by banks that use them in order to be able to provide better services to the customers. And on the other side, there's also the direct access by these technological companies, so the ones that we are mentioning, that is to say the fintech and big tech. And therefore, as to the first aspect, I'd say that the regulations that are being developed and which are in force already, such as the EBA guidelines or outsourcing or the cloud outsourcing, well, they're all consistent and in line with the needs to correctly supervise, especially banks. And then the proposal that we see, and which we've seen recently, of the DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, we're sure that it will contribute to harmonize the regulatory framework at European level, and also to improve the resilience and security of the sector through the supervision of the critical ICT third-party providers. And as regards the second prospect, that is to say the access, the direct access by these technology service providers, then we fully support the mantra that is always reiterated. There is the need of same activity, same risk, same regulation, and same supervision. And I'd like to add some food for thought in the light of the several remarks made at the EU level. That is to say, maybe it is possible to balance the activity-based regulations and as they generally are issued at a EU level, and also entity-based regulations. So this is some food for thought, which is not directly issued by me actually, but this is something that we read in a speech made recently by the chairman of the Financial Stability Institute, in which the item and the topic of the fintech regulations was tackled. So undoubtedly, these technology providers are more and more pervasive. I don't know where you can still me. Can you still hear me, right? Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we have to close. Without lingering into the details, I like to stress that either DORA or the Digital Market Act or the Market Crypto Regulation are useful to identify all of these phenomena. But at the same time, we wish that these legislative processes can be, if possible, maybe not too long, not to risk that we are not keeping up with these innovations. And I'd like to close by underlining the need to think about the end customers and to devote to the end customers the necessary financial education also when it comes to the use of these innovative tools. Also because otherwise we'd find ourselves in a situation of, dealing with criticalities. So that is why we hope that this topic is promoted by national and EU organizations. Thank you. Thank you, Gianluca. So, at this point, the floor to Marcus to share with us how, in the strategy of the Commission, PSD2 and the revision of the PSD2, how they fall within the initiative on open finance. So we are getting, reassured.
Well, I'm not sure if I can reassure you on this topic, but I think it's it's a very prominent topic, of course, and we often receive the question, okay, I mean, how does this relate with the PSD2? So unfortunately, I'm not really in a position to talk about open finance. It's done by a different unit, as you all know. But of course, we are in regular contact with them, and they are very much interested on how the provisions on access to payment accounts work. And there is, of course, great interest, and I can tell you that PSD2 is for the open finance initiative definitely a role model. So obviously, this open finance initiative is about access to data across a very wide range of financial services. So banking, insurance, investment, pensions, and what is clear from the digital finance strategy is that the Commission will present a legislative proposal by mid 2022, so mid next year. And our colleagues, they are currently working on priority use cases. But these two initiatives, so our PSD2 review on the one side and open finance, are two separate work streams. I think this is important to keep in mind. But what is clear is that PSD2, so especially the provisions of access to payment accounts, is as I said, a kind of role model for them, and since this is also part of our review, so also with regard to the provisions on access to accounts, I mean, this is also being assessed, and we will need to take a decision here as well whether changes are being needed. The 90-day rule was mentioned already, is a typical example that we are far from. I mean, these rules are far from perfect, and there are changes. So what I wanted to say is that colleagues from working on this open finance initiative, of course, will also look very carefully on what the outcome of our review on the access to payment accounts will look like. But as I said, it is foreseen that these are two separate work streams, because we also receive questions. Okay, I mean, what does it mean? Does it mean that you will kind of separate the provisions on the access to payment accounts and move it to the more horizontal general initiative on open finance? This is not yet decided, and this is completely open. There are, of course, different policy options, but as I said, my message is for the time being, these are two separate work streams, but of course, content-wise, they are very much related.
Thank you, Marcus. So hopefully the suggestion that Annie mentioned already to introduce more balanced rules in terms of roles and responsibilities and economic model, we hope that this is considered both within open finance and within the review of the PSD2. I just wanted to give the floor to Marco for a final advice to regulators. Having considered that you were mentioning that some countries, some non-EU countries have taken some different approaches, and with a view to the possible review, what are the suggestions from your point of view? So your suggestions to the regulators. I'll try to be very short in the interest of time, because many things have been said already and also mentioned by the colleagues that are with us today in this panel. So, of course, the privilege of working with some central banks in some countries gives us the opportunity to for instance, analyze what the regulator is doing. As Marcus said, it is important to make some internal, let's say, analysis whether things have to be carried out in a department of the Commission, or, for instance, other departments that deal with aspects that go beyond the mere access to accounts. So, according to the experience we're carrying out, I believe it is important to underline the importance of opening up to other subjects, so not just the subjects of the financial market. That's guaranteeing the mutual approach, and also for the subjects that will be in the market, so technological and from other sectors, and to guarantee the convergence and the sharing of information. I don't know whether this is going to fall within the set of information of PSD3 or the other aspects. And also some operators that participate in the payment market, and also to have an experience that is customer oriented. We're going towards automation, so also the infrastructure has to work and operate in real time. We also need to pay attention to the proportionality principle. And also, in order to have the same rules and the same advantages as large operators that invest huge capitals. Last but not least, and this is probably more technical, we have to go beyond the link between API and, say, banking channel. And this is a tool that allows automation and facilitates the extension of a payment process in an automated way for different market operators. And then the API channel needs to have the same rules So if we imagine that some processes are totally automated in the exchange of API information, then when reading the information, customers need to be supported. So in the moment in which, for instance, you give a notification of the suspension of the channel due to maintenance, I'm talking about the internet banking, then other channels like the API have to be suspended as well. Whereas there might be problems for all of the automated processes that should continue to work because there's an API call to the systems of the bank. So in short, this is what I'd like to add to what the colleagues said. Thank you, and also thank you for being very short, but unfortunately, we might talk about that for the entire morning, but time is running short. But we will talk about it again in the future. So I'd like to thank all of the speakers. And see you next year. So I'd like to ask to announce at this point the date for the Salone dei Pagamenti 2022, that hopefully will be in person, or it will be. And so Milan next year. Thank you.